sleep can get compromised with your biochemistry later in life. So you got to learn to adapt, but you never stop the physicality.
And we're live today on Imagine Fitting In. My next guest today is Sifu Slim. I consider him probably, obviously I believe we're in the same kind of profession, wellness, fitness, general good health. And so I'd like to welcome Sifu. Listeners realize, and again, welcome other listeners that Imagine Fitting In is all about mentors, healthy lives, and community. So we know each of those are key components to I would say, civilized society. And I've never met anybody that has not been complimentary and accepting of those terms. And so again, I want to welcome Sifu Slim. And usually right off the bat, Sifu, I usually ask you, where were you born? Where do you call home today? And, what was family like with your parents and all that?
Cool. Great. I'm so glad we got this time to connect online today. And I am blessed. It's a blessing to be asked by your family to come and care for an elder person in the family or a person in need in the family. So they've been helping me all these years. And I did a lot of co-working with my father as a young lad. And then we did a lot of golf training, and he helped me so much with my homework in the early days. He taught me how to do so many things. And I became, because of him, advanced in some of my classes at school, some of my activities that I did. My writing ability is something that would probably be besides doing the right thing, my writing ability in terms of a specific professional thing that I can do was thanks to him. And because he gave me a jump start and the teachers saw that I had some ability, they helped me a little bit more too. And that's what you do with the young Roger Federer. You see this kid's a little bit different, and it's just how it naturally flows. You want that kid to attain the level that you think is potential for him. And so when you do get a jump start on things, as you know, Greg, it sends you off into life at least halfway there, and maybe with a little bit of advantage. And we all want to find our calling. We all want to find things that we're good at. And if you really have people who believe in you and see those things, because you're just a young 5-year-old, you're a young 10-year-old, you may not know those things, but sometimes you do get an idea when you're in PE class and you're able to run faster than everybody. But having people believe in you and share those times at meals and the end of the day, and the drives to the sporting events that you do, or the state essay contest that I was in, those types of things. My dad spent countless hours passing on wisdom with me, and that's a big part of who I am today. And now I'm back here, and he's 94, and I'm helping him with some of his life things after he had a 4th stroke, not because of any bad health practices in his life, just because he's an old fella. And that's what manifested in his brain, and he's still plugging along at age 94, learning how to reuse things, and his mind's still good, and it's a blessing to be around.
That's I can completely relate, Sifu. So I will share a couple things. Number one, that building of character and self-esteem and confidence at such an early age, and I consider that vital. 2, I just spent the last 5 years taking care and keeping my mother in the house. She just recently passed away, just this September. So I completely understand. It's going on around the country. Obviously, the baby boom generation, there's a massive amount of people getting older. And I completely agree, like coming back around, right? They did so much for us and coming back. And it sounds like your father just has amazing will of character and strength and a zest for life. So God bless and all the best for him. So do you have brothers and sisters?
I'm in the middle of 2 sisters, which I think was a good thing. I always thought that it'd be good to have a big brother around, that type of thing. But now that I think back on my sisters being around, I always had friends of mine around, neighbor friends and friends from across town. We're always doing sports as a group, and my sisters always had friends. So I got to see the 2 year younger girls and the year and a half over girls and what was going on with them, plus my mother and my aunts. So it was good to be around all that female energy because I would say, even though I'm an ectomorph, a tall, thin, Michael Jackson built dude, I was really, I wouldn't say I was an alpha male, but I was a guru type Sifu male where I didn't let people get away with a lot of stuff. Now, thankfully, nobody took a big pop and broke my teeth out by doing that because I wasn't a big looking kid, and I wasn't gifted in stand up boxing when I was a young kid. But I did get into minor fisticuffs in these suburban areas outside of New York, 25 miles, when I grew up in Maplewood, New Jersey. And then at age
Okay.
10, my parents both saw that it was getting a little rough in those towns that they grew up in that were kind of like Back to the Future, where you had
Sure.
the one or three churches, you had the couple of elementary schools and the one high school, and everybody knew each other. And so they grew up there, and their parents were had moved into that area, and my dad's grandparents came from various places in Europe. So, there was a lot of fisticuffs and sticking up for yourself and all those prior generations. And then I came along in 1962. There was a little of that my first 15 years, but I would say far less than the time of my father and my grandfather in terms of
Hmm.
neighborhood squabbles, the Italians versus the Polish or whatever it was, just the
Uh-huh.
street versus the other street. And I'm a mixture of a lot of those different parts of Europe, which is a kind of a cool thing because I can go to 6 different countries in Europe and look up my family roots, so that's kind of cool.
Right.
And and so, but I was always a kid who thought he had the idea of, where is the force, and here's Obi-Wan Kenobi, and here's Yoda, and this is the good side, the bright side, and then there's the dark side over here with Darth Vader and dominance and stupid aggression. There is a time
The
for proper
polarity.
aggression, aggressive behavior in
Hmm.
certain ways. And you can read The Way of the Peaceful Warrior and many other books, Bruce Lee's books, about learning how to channel positive energy and knowing when to stick up for yourselves and others, and when to just let that person that's going through a little bit of a tantrum kind of calm down a little bit before you're late.
Hmm.
But I thought I knew that at a young age, and thankfully people must have resonated with that because I didn't get beat up a lot. I had a couple of squabbles. I got into some wrestling matches, and thankfully, I found that I was good, squirmy wrestler. And then I got into that, and then I got into jujitsu. And so,
Okay.
jujitsu is a non-permanent damage in the most places when you want to submit somebody. You can do it without breaking anything or breaking teeth. It's a really cool
Right,
thing.
right. Real
Our
cool
friend
art
Joe
form.
Rogan talks about that a lot, but I'll go back to Greg and see what he thinks of all this.
Okay. Well, there's a couple things. Number one, I was also a middle child I had an older sister, two brothers on the other ends of me, and I was a middle child. And I grew up as well with that feminine energy. We were only 18 months apart. We grew up and we basically kind of came of age together. And I attribute both my father teaching us the power of positive thinking, probably when we were 8 or 9 years old, to my time with my sister and my ability even today now to have a comfortable conversations, engaging conversations with females, right? When I grew up, my neighborhood was the same thing. I soon discovered in my neighborhood, they soon discovered that, I'll just put it to you this way. My older brother was a real good looking guy, and all the tough guys in the neighborhood wanted to be his friend. And so they get all his leftovers from the girls. And then my sister was very good looking, and she was okay, fine, no problem there. And then myself, I come up after, and I'm kind of a pushover, an artist, as you see behind me. You name a medium, I've been participating in it, and I believe art and expression of art is critical for mental wellness. It's a strong vehicle. But getting back to when you talked about I just discovered and realized that I had a bigger world outside of my neighborhood. So I got tired of some of the dysfunction and the alcoholism and the craziness. So I distanced myself from them. And then basically, I grew up in Dayton, Ohio. But to wind down on this thought about what you said about growing up neighborhoods. I was born in '63, so very, we walked a similar path in times. But 34 countries later, 34 years later, I swing back around to my hometown, and here I am back today, and I've been in fitness for like 30 years. So it's real important, I believe, that my essence, I always tell by Sifu that my essence, I'm an artist, and my passion is fitness or wellness, and my ability to communicate and to be diplomatic. So I think, I believe I'm very strong at diplomatic kind of responses and kind of trying to settle energy. So that's kind of like how I went about my way. But let's get back to you. So
I have to ask you one quick thing.
Yep.
You sound kind of Sifu-esque, guru-esque as well.
Well, you know what? I've been doing this for 32 years. My moniker is the Balance Professor. I've got major programs that involve, I'm a movement specialist. I've done a lot of neurological focal work on how important exercise in the brain is. I had some really wonderful relationships. All of a sudden, I'm not going to get too deep my story, but there's a gentleman named Dr. John Rady. I'm sure you've heard of him.
I interviewed him.
Exercise in the Brain. And basically that book, I will tell you, I'm going to summarize this right now. John Rady, Exercise in the Brain, that whole book was written about two guys in Naperville, Illinois, which I end up, Phil Lawler and Paul Zidarski. God bless Phil Lawler, he's no longer with us. But those two basically, I tracked them down. They caught my attention. They invited me out of the blue to speak at their fitness conference. And I used to be in advertising, Sifu, and I have a passion for fitness. I walked away from that industry. Within 6 years of being a personal trainer, I'm being invited to speak with all these peers that are exercise physiologists, kinesiologists, because Phil was fascinated by my work in balance and what it does in the brain. So I felt humbled with that. So that's in my relation to the Exercise in the Brain book. So yes, your answer, and long-winded answer to your question is yes. I just known all of my life that I've wanted to help people. So now what about you? Like, did you have inklings of ideas and thoughts when you were a kid? Like, did you know what you wanted to be when you were a kid? Do you have any grand ideas?
Well, when I was 7-ish in Maplewood, New Jersey, we had our first long paper to do. And I wrote it out on a yellow legal pad, and it was 11 pages. So imagine a 7-year-old putting that together with some sources. That's early in life to be doing that. And it was something I couldn't put down. I really wanted to do well at it. Both my older sister is very artistic. My father and mother are artistic. I didn't have the best handwriting, so I worked at that. And I got, my sister could be considered like a natural calligraphy type person. That's how good her handwriting is. And she could do it 5 different ways, whatever slant, whatever size. I mean, her brain operates differently than mine does with that type of art. So it's interesting to watch people who are naturally gifted at that. But I got better handwriting over time. We used to do a penmanship all throughout elementary school. And then we had a penmanship class in 6th grade. So that was our last semester year where they said, hey, by now you've got to get this done, so do it. And I think that was good. They don't do that, as far as I know, in 6th grade anymore. And I wish they would return to that. But at that same time, I wrote this paper on Michelangelo, the sculptor artist. And I wish I still had a copy. You know how you wish you had some of these great things that you were involved in over your life, some of your awards, some of the pictures of different people, etc. I have a lot of pictures, but I don't have my old reports because you and I grew up pre-computer, and it wasn't easy to keep those. But I wrote this paper, and I did very well on it, and I kept doing it. And in the old days, we used to have to give book reports galore, sometimes 3 a week. And so we're up
Wow.
for whether it's 5 minutes or 10 minutes doing those. And then I was in the 4-H, where I am right now is a farm in Clinton, Oldwick area, New Jersey. And we were members of the 4-H Sheep Club. So I had to give reports once a month at the Sheep Club meetings. And I think they were monthly meetings, but I could be wrong. Might have been bi-monthly, but that was good. So we had all these adults watching us and encouraging us, supporting us in our public speaking and our learning. We had to keep logbooks, the accounting of the farm, all this type of stuff. And then we learned about all the other animals that all the other kids in 4-H had at the county fair. And then sometimes at summer camp, we do the 4-H camp. So just constant learning, but it was not crammed learning like you might see in universities now or private schools or the military. It was very organic, where you have the old people like 80 and our parents' age in their 40s through 60s, and then us 0 to 18-year-old kids. And it was just very organic way to grow up. And if you look at it, some of the organizations who do this well, you could look at the Seventh-day Adventists, the Mormons, some of these fundamentalist churches. They do that same thing. So they get you surrounded by mentors at a very young age. And
Very much like a village,
it's the
right?
village, and
Yeah.
and most people, not all, but most people are comfortable with that support system. Knowing what I think I know about the indoctrination of certain parts of religion and how many religions there have been, more than 5,000 since the dawn of knowledge, or of written knowledge, then now I stop to think that the indoctrination of this is the only way is probably not a good thing to be cramming down kids' throats at a very young age. But I'm not going to change that in my lifetime. But I'd like everybody to find a path that works for them.
Right. And you kind of like when you reference that in terms of, the word being spiritual. I would say that I am quite spiritual. I had a Roman Catholic foundation through my readings and curiosity. I asked myself way back when I was about 21 years old, I said, I'm tired. I want to know what happened, was going on in the world, how people interacted before the big 5 religions. And that what led me to, I'm getting back to what you mentioned about Star Wars. That's what led me to Joseph Campbell's work. I had some wild stories, like 6 degrees of separation from Joseph Campbell on my journey, which is sort of like these kind of moments. I don't know if you ever had them in your career. You're like, what am I doing? I know I want to do this. I love it. And all of a sudden you have some moments.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of them was my father passed away in 2000, and I found myself in Los Angeles. You'll enjoy this. I look across one of the big clubs, one of the probably the most kind of superstar Hollywood clubs in California, in Santa Monica. And I look across, I lost my father about 5 years earlier. I look across, I see a gentleman, Sifu, that looks just like my late father. And I'm freaking out. I'm like, I'm going to have to talk to that individual. So I go over, I introduce myself. Just that fact was kind of wild and interesting. I get to talk to him. All of a sudden he says, yes. He goes, I've been in the film business forever. I was talking, I don't know how, if I mentioned Campbell. He goes, oh, I've met Joseph Campbell. I actually work with George Lucas and Joseph Campbell on Star Wars.
Wow.
And he was literally on the film, and I'm sitting here, right, with a guy who shook hands with Joseph Campbell. And Star Wars is based on all of what we know are the rituals and mythology of the world. And that was a fascinating experience for me. So I had to just like put my hand out and say, I got to shake your hand, because I'm pretty much positive you probably shook his hand. So it was just one of those moments. And
was that pre-email or post-email?
No, that's post-email. That was 2005. And then by 2011, I go to New Jersey. My ex-wife and I are living in New Jersey, And one of my first clients, I was a fitness training manager at a big club. It was sitting on Cliffside Park, where the old Palisades amusement park was, right near the George Washington Bridge. Well, we had treadmills that my whole club looked over from the cliffs over to Manhattan. My first client there, I meet a woman, her name's Carol. I can't remember her last name. I said, Carol, talking to her. She went to school at St. Joseph's or whatever, where Joseph Campbell taught. He was her teacher. And I'm like, oh my God, two people that I meet that have talked and spoken to and interacted with a guy that died in 1987 that changed my perspective completely. And I'll just wind up with this comment. I believe Joseph Campbell's Mask of a Thousand Faces and all his writings and all it makes the foundation of every self-help book I've ever seen. Every time I read most authors, there's some kind of trace of Campbell and its roots, and there's little pockets. So it can be, if you ever try to read a Mask of a Thousand Faces, it's one of his most spectacular books. But the book that got me was The Power of Myth, with interview with Bill Moyers, and you can find those on YouTube. Powerful. But let's get back to you.
Let me ask you one question, Greg.
Yep.
I think you and I'm getting a little download from the universe here. Yoda's sprinkling, flurrying, snow flurries outside here, and Yoda's sprinkling down a little message for me. And he told me to ask Greg if Greg would like to kick around the idea of taking, is it the Man of a Thousand Faces or the Mask of a Thousand Faces?
I'm sorry, it's a Mask of a Thousand Faces.
So if we take a Mask of a Thousand Faces and we put together an annual retreat, we start with that as the theme, and everybody gets to read that book before they get to our retreat. And on the retreat, we do all these positive things that you and I like to do. And we shaman on out, and we get these people healed and open their minds and hearts, get their bodies going, get their digestive flowing, and give them some peace. And I think we should do that minimum once a year. And if Greg's not going to do it, I'm going to knock on your door and say, come on, Greg, I'm twisting your arm here. Let's do it.
Okay, you're scaring me because you're too much like me. Okay, so I will tell you, people say Mask of a Thousand Faces. Well, our lives change. I believe this is my theory, my thought process about this. Life is not static. It's dynamic. It's constantly changing, and we need to adapt. And when we say the masks, I've worn a mask of a young boy. I've wore a mask of a young elementary school guy. I wore a mask of trying to get through high school and loving music. I wore a mask going into college and then discovering physical fitness and working out and being tuned by what I call my body temple. And then all of a sudden I'm in advertising. I play the drums. I'm a certified drone pilot. I paint, I sing, drums, photography. I'm a movement specialist. So those are all my masks that I wear at any given time. And it's formed what I call my universe and my existence, because I think you might be aware of this, but that classic line, Joseph Campbell, and I'm paraphrasing, he says, the question is not ask yourself, not what is the meaning of life, but what is your experience of being alive? You have control and essence of that, but everything else, forget about it. So that whole kind of thing of like, right, you can only do as well as you can only react, right? You can't control it, how you react and take that on. So have you had challenges, or like where'd you put your focus on in your teens and 20s? Like, where were you at that time of your life?
So my teens and my teens were very interesting because it was the 70s, and I think you could make the argument that in the modern world, the 70s were the best time to be alive. Incredible amount of productivity, freedom. freedom bred productivity and creativity. There's the magic of the 70s. She had the end of three wars. Vietnam War wasn't world war, but it was world forming because
Mm-hmm.
people, the young people said, Ganuk is Ganuk. Enough is enough. You're really going too far here. You did World War One, World War Two, Korea, and all kinds of other battles, and the end of the British Empire and other empires, and the Belgian Congo, just on and on. Then you get to Vietnam, where everything's televised,
Yes.
and you have smart people. All the World War II people, their kids were going to Berkeley, their kids are going to Ohio State, wherever. And they said, "Come on, we can't keep this militarism from the last few let's say 1,000 years of militarism from Asia, Europe, Africa. You can't keep this going. This is silly. I mean, come on. We're educated people. We know about biology. We know about evolution. We know about longevity and these things. We got to start being more communal, even though we're overpopulated and urbanized now and
Right.
suburbanized. We got to work together. So the 70s were the last time of a proliferation of neighborhood block parties. So tell me what you think about the block parties and what I said about the 70s, Greg, and see if that resonates with you.
I mean, completely, absolutely completely. Um, you know, I remember block parties. I remember that kind of, you had people that, a number of different kinds of churches around. But back in the 70s when we were growing up, basically we grew up at the same time. Um, there wasn't, it was just a respected position, which people didn't need to have to talk about their specifics, what they do, their spiritual, right? Their connection to their higher being or whatever you want to call it, the God. There was just like an underlying respect that everybody gave to each other without judgment, civil, friendly. I mean, we used to have parties where we would roof houses. The women would make all the food, and all the young men, the ones that were not going to fall off, and we try to keep the old guys that shouldn't be up on the roof, keep them off so they don't fall off. And I have vivid memories of that kind of collaboration, which, if you think about it, and I'll go back to the mechanics of your writing, because I'm interested in how much of a writer you are, but when you wrote those mechanics, so those movements in the brain and the mechanics of that process is so much more powerful. And that's got a lot to do with my program that I have in terms of, if you're familiar with the 3 C's, and Thomas Friedman said, in order for an individual to succeed in the 21st century, they must be able to do the 3 C's: problem solving, critical thinking, communication, and collaboration. That was already an ongoing kind of regular challenge. Like, we need to management, we need to be effective, but then we throw in technology now, and the fact that people are spending less time in person, they're actually moving less, sitting is a new smoking, blah blah blah. When I first meet a client, I spend probably first 3 weeks teaching them how to do all the exercises to counter the negative effects of their sitting, to open up a little window for them to then start getting physical.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting in terms of, how we've come to be. And you mentioned Michelangelo. It was fascinating because I just saw on public television, they were talking about Leonardo da Vinci's career, and he was Michelangelo's peer. And back in those days, they said the modern society, they love their artists, and they like to pit those artists together against each other.
Yep.
Right. And so I guess I found that Leonardo da Vinci was much more, probably most leaning more of a philosopher and almost a poet. And one of the things they shared, which was fantastic, and I'm putting it to my mantra, is that to dream, to imagine, and to create. And Leonardo da Vinci, ultimately, he didn't really care about creating. What was most critical for him was to dream and imagine the world around you, and to make the discoveries so forth. So it just finds it interesting because as an artist, I've always spent my entire life thinking I feel like Sifu that I see too much. I see and feel too much. And it can be overwhelming when somebody comes and says, here, take this and put this here and put that there. This fits in there and you have to do this in that order. And I'm seeing too much along the way. It's just the way my brain works. I've come to discover that and how I stayed off antidepressants and anxiety or whatever. So I think I self understood that I was probably ADHD. It took me 52 years to figure it out. But I used exercise when I was 18 years old to buffer myself out. And I've been preaching the power of exercise and the brain and function. Everybody used to tease me back in the day when I was always about posture and I wasn't getting big. But I have healthy joints today. I'm 61 years old. And it's just, everything's kind of like you're writing on the wall.
So I'm going to bring you to a mentor of mine. That's Ben Hogan.
I've heard of him.
He was the top U.S. golfer, 1940s, probably 38 through the 40s, and probably ended his career early 50s. And he was known as the hardest working golf practitioner, physical fitness person, doing the right thing person. I mean, these guys used to have to drive across the country in the 1930s and 40s for golf tournaments, and they weren't well paid, so they had to figure out a way to make that money. But I'm going to give you one little tip that I learned from Ben Hogan. He was more strongly built than I was, maybe more along the lines of your body, Greg. And one of the exercises he did, which I can't imagine many people doing these days because we're so ingrained in going to the gym and using all kinds of contraptions. I love old school workouts. And so one of the things he did is he took a towel and he had a bucket and he would dip the towel in the bucket and then he would squeeze out the water and then he'd dip it in and do it the other way. Now, this is such an important thing for all functionality, is to have a good connection between your brain through your shoulders all the way through your arms. If you really wanted to, when you're squeezing, you could even squeeze other things. You know, you could be in a wide a non-split, but a wide where you're working your adductor muscles pulling in while you're doing this. And I do a lot of adductor work to stabilize these things. And actually, if I had to state what my physical fitness philosophy is to use every part of your entire body as much as you can. So I want everything in balance. Hold on one second. I have to leave my phone on just in case my dad needs me, but that was a scam call. So I
well, that, as they say, Sifu, nothing happens in isolation.
Yes. So let's say I'm in a position where I'm pulling in, I'm planted, and I'm setting up to do that. I can be doing, while I'm doing that position and breathing, I could be doing the towel exercise here. I could be doing a dynamic tension movement like that, pretending I'm going through like the earth right there.
You pull into some Bruce Lee stuff there.
I could do it low. I could be turning my body. So these are the things that I probably saw these things in Bruce Lee and other people. Bruce Lee did a lot of dynamic tension exercises. And if you go out to nature, I call it nature's dojo, and you just have some seeds planted in your brain about movement and tension and releasing tension, that type of thing. And you get your feet, if there's, a safe place for your feet, and you go into the earth and you start doing movement, it's going to come to you, because we are leopards and jaguars and bears. We're the same thing. We're an animal, right? And we know how to move. You got to get rid of all of the thought process. You might take a little bit of me, a little bit of Greg, a little bit of Bruce Lee, a little bit of Jack LaLanne, a little bit of Michael Jackson. You take some of that out there and you work on it and you go, okay, The guy I saw yesterday at the airport is about 8 years younger than I am, and he's a fitness guy, and he did a lot of wrestling, football, and boxing. And when he turned, he went like this, and
Right.
that's what Greg and I might do if we had a car crash or we're 95, right? He was
Right.
doing this in his 50s, and I told him, I said, hey, do you mind if I share some stuff? Because we had already been into our conversation. We're in line waiting to check in on our luggage there, drop luggage check in. And I touched him on the neck and I said, you see how you're moving, right? And so then I said, check this out. There's the bullet, there's the matrix. And I just went back and I held these little flowy positions. And I said, I don't want you to do this right now. But imagine you being functionally strong, being confident in your balance, having all your glutes, your hamstrings, your spine, everything working, your feet, your connection, and taking all that power you have in the gym and just lightening it up and going into this flow. And then you're getting closer to Hickson Gracie or Bruce Lee or some of these great physical movers. Michael Jackson, as a young dude, had it. Herschel Walker was in the martial arts.
Right.
Jose Canseco, 250, 60 pounds, and he was a good martial artist. So you combine all that Qigong and yoga and strength and endurance and speed and all the other things that you can put in there, mindfulness, the list
Right.
is
Right.
endless, Greg. And then
So,
I think then I think you've really got something special.
so yeah, my specialty these days, I've trained high performance athletes and all kinds of ages, and I specialize in actually fitness, post rehab fitness strategy, and or pre-strategy fitness strategy before they go into surgery, so they can go in strong, come out stronger, and recover sooner.
Very important feature that you're
Um,
providing.
so yeah, as the moniker of the balance professor, it's all about body weight. It's all about function, joints, right? Joint mobility, range of motion. And so that's why, I'm as a drummer, and I also practice the art of poi, Chinese swing chains. Have you ever seen Chinese swing
I
chains?
have. I have. It's
Yeah. So
incredible.
I was taught talk about in an international world. I'm in Puerto Escondido, Mexico, being taught a New Zealand indigenous art form by two girls from Canada. So, but I'm all about that movement, and I would go back to, like, in terms of like modern day sports medicine, right? So when you have a lineman's training for that, and I'm sure he took his abuse, right? And so you probably remember back in the day, I think it was Oakland Raider, Willie Galt would take ballet. So that movement and dynamic focus, and that's basically most of my work happens. I do neuromuscular conditioning. It's mostly conditioning their brains, and I'm helping them improve their kinetic awareness, and then ultimately their active movement and where their body's in space with their proprioception. So that being said, there was articles years ago about how everybody's just talking strength and cardio, and most people still think strength and cardio, but it's the
Bigger,
balance. And
faster, stronger has been the moniker for 20 years or maybe 30.
right, right. And so it's so limiting. And what we know is that with the advancement of sports medicine, if somebody trains like a football player, if they can avoid a non-contact injury and train smart, they can have a 10-year career.
Yep.
But if you're not really keeping on top of that, but I think I go back to the idea here that people will ask me, like, "Oh, you're the balance professor. Do you know what they do, Sifu?" They immediately stand on one leg, either float it in space or do some stupid stork pose. I'm sorry to say stupid, but stork pose. I'm like, no, no, no. It's about the balance of power, your overall body makeup and joints. So I can't tell you how many women I've met over my 30-year career that destroyed their hips because their yoga teacher decided that they should be able to do more. So that being said, I think there's a real education. Well, I got a question for you, getting back to I'm going to get you this question. I'm going to get back to it because the reason why I started this podcast, Sifu. Mentors, healthy lives, and community. I lost my nephew to addiction in 2022. He was an amazing natural athlete. He reminded me super much like me as an very playful, fun, artistic, creative, his own person. And the addiction, unfortunately, got the best of him. So my whole podcast is in honor of my nephew. That being said, I'm looking to generate nuggets in my podcast. And I'm sure we all listen to podcasts. We get these little bits of information at different times. The Bruce Lee stuff, the movement, the breathing, all that, which is all plays a part. And you don't ever know what nugget is going to hit anybody when. But let me ask you, I'm interested because, we kind of do the same thing in terms of wellness and the overview and these different extra modalities, not just, the, strength and cardio. What are the biggest problems you think are facing young people, getting into their 20s, the kids?
Yeah. My hero, one of my heroes is a young dude who he got drafted on a farm team when he was 14. Bobby Orr, famous Boston Bruin hockey player, right? Strongly
14.
built guy, not as big as his father. His father was bigger. He had to work all the time. They said his father was as good as he was. His younger brother, I believe, also very gifted, just did not do as much towards goal setting as Bobby Orr did. But Bobby Orr says to this day, and he's become successful in other things besides his hockey career, and he's a very sweet person by nature. I'm not saying he's perfect. I'm saying his nature is sweet, and he was the hockey player that everyone said this has never happened before in the history of hockey. Somebody that comes along and has such a different level of ability. Well, he learned playing on the pond or the inlet at Parry Sound, and they played a game called shinny, and it's keep away from the other people, and it's not hard checking. It's beautiful motion like the Soviets back in the 50s through 70s. It's this beautiful puck handling and passing game where you're using this talent, and they have to come get you. And so he thought that was a great way to learn. All of his friends learned that way. The kids that he met on the traveling teams learned that way. This is the Canada sport. Like you and I
Right.
played baseball and did neighborhood wrestling and football and basketball. They played hockey, for the 5 to 6 month winter season, and then if they had money to go to an indoor rink, they did that all the time. His statement is that we're over programming young people. We're taking kids at age 8, 10, 12, 14, and we're teaching them plays that he would have learned when he went to college. He went right to the pros. He didn't play pros until he was 17, but he was on the farm team being watched and sponsored to a certain degree by the age of 14. So he says, let the kids play. I agree with that. You and I in a neighborhood in Dayton or in Maplewood, New Jersey, would have been playing a game. You and I would have probably gone and had an ice cream afterwards because we're kindred spirits.
Right.
And you share this wonderful thing that's called discovery. And if you have a kid that is getting supported, you go out and play. Or all of all sides of my grandparents told their kids to go out and play. My parents told me to go out and play. And then in the 90s, I heard the word a play date, where you had to, make a call and your mom dropped you off and you had a play
Right.
date, and that ends at whatever hour. And it's too complicated. Kids
Right.
have to be able to make mistakes. If they
Organic.
hurt their shin, if they get in a fisticuff, whatever, you don't pull a gun or a knife. Come on, you do your thing, and you learn from this. You learn about boundaries. You learn about communication. You learn from the older brothers and sisters, and the Bobby Orr of your neighborhood. You learn from him, and hopefully that person passes something on to you. It's just this natural, organic way, like tribal people learned what skills they were good at. you don't put these kids in a program where you ask them all to do the same things at a young age and then get into personal training at age 8. It's just too much. So let the kids
Right.
play.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of things when you mentioned, um, that, oh gosh, what was his name? What was his name? It was his nickname Doc. Can't remember the gentleman who,
Basketball?
yeah. Well, Phil Jackson, Tex Ritter, Chicago Bulls. You see my thing back
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Um, Phil Jackson, that triangular defense. And basically, Phil Jackson's a mantra or a way of working with his players was to convince them to relax enough to just almost be like you're playing that street ball and you're not thinking about an outcome. You're so in the moment that you can't perceive any wrong or right move. And that's that flow. And that's why I believe he was so successful coming in, to, have this suit like a Bobby Orr, right? Michael Jordan, come on. How do you put this guy and you harness all his intense energy and drive and be able to spread it out and convince him that he doesn't need to overthink how much the other guys are working. And it was a masterful job. And we saw that happen and take place. So that being said, and you go back to when you talk about the mechanics of that community, I agree. Because if you think about it, when you go out there with that street ball, you're critical thinking, problem solving, you're communicating, and you're collaborating. And that was just before we get to the information age that we were like, right? We were out moving the body,
Yeah.
making that brain, getting, right? Like you said, fisticuffs and all that kind of stuff and hurts. And you have to, one of I just had my latest guest said the most important thing he said you think you should do with your child is have them try to do a door-to-door salesman or do cold calls, and to learn rejection and to learn fortitude and understand that things just don't always work out.
Yeah.
And you have to, right, take the good with the bad. Now, I think to me, these kids, number one, it's a reason why I left advertising, Sifu, because I got tired of using my creative energies to sell propaganda, to sell everything I didn't practice.
Let me say
Cigarettes,
amen to
alcohol,
that, because that's
right?
a big statement. You just said you no longer wanted to sell out. And I told my father, who he did 30 years on Wall Street, I told him early, Dad, I said, I'm not like these other people. I'm a different kind of cat. I didn't know the word guru or Sifu in my early 20s, but I was a different kind of cat. And I didn't fit in with
Yeah,
these people who could say the right thing and then think differently. And they're just going for the money or the new account. They had some ego or monetary or what's the other word? A sadism, where you want to knock the other guy out, the sadistic
that
ploy.
was it.
Uh,
That the late 80s, early 90s, like I'm getting mine.
so yeah, that wasn't me, and I'm an introspective guy. John Boy Walton, the writer, the thinker, the older brother, the doing the right thing, the wiser person. If I wasn't wise in everything, I certainly wanted to become wise in as many of the things that I could. And some people call it the path of becoming an intellectual. I started out as a Renaissance man like you. I was interested in so many things, very earthy. Still like to play golf, which is historically part of it was an affluent sport, so it was tennis. But and then Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was something I've done since 1997. So all these things are part of who I am and my outlets and the ways that I bond with others. They're terrific, but I still had to figure out how I was going to fit in with this material world thing, how I was going to be able to afford my rent,
Let
my
me just say
food,
one thing.
my
Let me,
trips.
say, let me just say one thing. You said how I was going to fit in. Imagine fitting in, kids.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, but that propaganda of, right, it was alcohol, cigarettes, bad food, prescription drugs, everything that I really didn't practice. And
Chicks,
so
chicks and blow.
I walked away. Pharmaceuticals. I walked away in 1991 and got to the fitness business, never looked back. And of course, I've had quite a few experiences and masks that I've worn in various other adventures by meeting very interesting people from all different kinds of professions and backgrounds and countries. So yeah, definitely a Renaissance man. Now, okay, we talked about the young kids, but what do you think about what's the biggest problem you think in terms? I know I deal with majority of my clients right now, the ones who have time, need, and the discretionary income are anywhere from 50 to 90 years old. So what do you think are the biggest
Well,
problems?
let me fill in one more thing on the young people. I would say that I am a fitness athlete who does a lot of sports, and I think if by doing that, I bred wellness into that activity at an early age. I took 26 years off of tennis, and in the United States, it's mostly hard courts. That was health-wise one of the best things that I could have done. People who stayed with it, by the time they got to be in their 50s and 60s, almost all of them that I saw had knee issues, might be wearing a knee brace, might be wearing an elbow brace, because if you get good, you do competitions. Competitions can become your focus. Wellness might be number 4, 5, or 6 on your
Right.
list. If you're a fitness athlete who knows his limitations or her limitations,
Good
then
point.
like Jack LaLanne, who, as far as I know, he didn't injure himself. Bruce Lee injured himself a lot. Most performance athletes are full of injuries. Laird Hamilton's book, which he wrote
Yeah.
about 12 years ago, there's one picture of him, this 210-pound, gorgeous athlete, a big wave surfer. They have arrows going to all the injuries, and it's got a little text box showing what that injury was, and it's all over his body from being a big wave surfer. That's a hard sport. Now, I'm not saying he did his life wrong, but I'm not 210 pounds and I'm not this big, strong athlete. I would have mangled myself if I had done what Laird Hamilton had done, if I did what Herschel Walker had done, getting tackled all the time, or if I played as much tennis as Jimmy Connors or John McEnroe, who both had injuries. John McEnroe's had three, I think, patella injuries from playing on hard courts. I haven't had any surgeries for anything besides hernias and a
Yeah.
nose, a breathing thing. So I'm very fortunate that I would guess I have less scar tissue than these people do.
Yeah.
So I think the fitness athlete who's got a huge wellness component, I don't like getting hurt. I like being fully functional. That's one of my goals. Have 100% of my body working 100% of the time. That's my goal. It doesn't always work, but that's
Right.
my goal. So that's one more thing I wanted to add about kids, Greg. Tell me if I'm on board with your philosophy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's playtime. I see parents bringing in kids and putting them on strength machines before their ligaments are developed. And you can't, I got to a point where I stopped saying something because people are think that I'm like butting in. I don't know what I'm talking about. But that being said, a typical client I'll talk about, the 50 and older crowd. It's just wear and tear issues. You're going to have wear and tear. You don't have to be an athlete to have incredible amounts of destructive wear and tear. You can be a little bit over your ideal weight. You can be really heavy, or you can be paper thin with dysfunctional postural dysfunction, and stuff's going to wear out. So, it's sort of like it comes with the territory in terms of athletes, and right, you just have to do it. Like, look at any young person and tell them, like, stop doing something for a reason, but because it's something they love. It's like some things, it just doesn't matter the price. It's just what I have to do. And I understand that. So, so obviously, I'm a very much big believer of medicine is probably the most important. I mean, exercise is probably the most important medicine or regular supplement that should be involved in every day, especially now that we're sitting even more so, which we know the effects there. So my big point about the older population and just even youngsters now, it's ridiculous. It's just very sad that we have the obesity epidemic. And we have, of course, diabetes too being accepted as just like, oh, that's just something, you have diabetes. You can't do anything about it. And number three, people don't realize that the amount of postural dysfunction when people go about their normal wear and tear. I have kids that are 26 years old. They walk in and they look like they're 70. They're moving. It's just, they haven't been moving. It's just kind of very sad based on like we talk about, right? Growing up in the 70s. I mean, shoot, you were outside. You said, summertime, you're like, mom was like, get out of the house. Don't come back till it's near dark and for dinner. But that being said, how do you think people can live better in this modern era? Especially about this, people living there. Everybody seems like they're living in their heads. Huh?
Yeah. Okay. So I jokingly say to people in the modern era, and that could be starting in the sedentary job scenario, which maybe was 1920. The big movement away from the farms probably started happening post 1910 and urbanization. And there's a lot of history that shows that it was orchestrated by forces, the material world forces. Get people off the farm, get them disconnected from the land, from each other, and from food and animals, where they, that's how people lived in the agrarian societies. They knew how to work all that stuff, and they got a charge out of it, physiological and a biochemical charge out of it every day. And their kids learned from them, and there they were having these meals when they had, successful crops and animals, and they get to connect with their neighbors and then go to church and the general store. Kind of a neat life, if and not in every aspect, but in many aspects, neat life. Then now you're in urban and suburbia, and you're more disconnected, and have rivalries and all this type of stuff. So there's been a little bit of that issue. I wrote my book, Sedentary Nation, and I think you don't want to write a book unless you've got something new to add to the game in a certain way. And I wanted to look into this, and I hadn't written a book of nonfiction yet, and I'd written some screenplays and some works of fiction and a lot of term papers in school and a lot of reports for some of my jobs. But now I said, well, okay, what am I going to do? Well, for something like 15 years, I was asking psychologists in America and a little bit in Europe, what are the biggest drivers of why people are coming to see you? Can you guess, Greg, what they told me?
In terms of like stress and mental health and all that?
Yeah, what would you
Dealing
think?
with the pressures of...
In the late 90s, early 2000s, what do you think was driving most people? If you just had to pick the Family Feud number one answer, what was driving most of these people to see psychologists?
I would guess, because I work near the CBOE, or the financial area down in Chicago, about money, man, about financial success, status, and the drive to be, I don't know, something more material than your own essence. That's my guess.
That's high up on the list. The one that they shared with me, and I asked probably 200 some people, was sleep disorders.
Mm-hmm.
So then I said, once I knew that, I said, I have an answer for some of this. And I'm not saying that this is the answer I would advise, but it's the difference between the immigrants who came from various countries to the East Coast, the Eastern Seaboard in the 1800s. They worked all the time. So most of their jobs were from movement. So you're bone tired at the end of the day. Do you have time to complain when you're bone tired and you're carrying at the end of your shift, you buy some potatoes when people didn't have meat every day? You carry up a bag of potatoes in Brooklyn up 5 sets of stairs, and you're in a house that's got 6 people living in a 2-bedroom, right? And somebody's sick and somebody's pregnant and a kid's crying. And how did they get to sleep? Well, it's because after the potatoes and the pasta and whatever else they had, maybe some vegetables and then meat a couple times a week, these people went to sleep because 2 things. One, the only way they could keep their job with a competitive younger person showing up is to be ready to go. You got to be well fed and as best you can with your limited income, your resources. You have to be well. You have to sleep well. That's it. Then the second thing is, at the end of the day, you're bone tired. So my statement in my book, Sedentary Nation, which takes a look at the history of physical movement from the hunter-gatherers through the farming culture, through the Industrial Revolution, through the beginnings of the industrial age, through the couch, desk, and car potato of the service-oriented and later the technology-oriented
Right.
society. And I look at the physicality, and I did that book. I did research for 4 years, cranked out that book, and I think I hit some good points that I hope people take a look at. It's on Amazon. It's on my website too, sedentarynation.com. Look at that and see if that rings true to you. See if that hits home with you. And then you'll see what my philosophy is about kids, middle-aged workers, post-middle-aged workers, and then seniors. And the seniors is the same thing. Now, I've had some wanting to sleep longer. And now that I'm in my 60s, then I didn't want to wake up at 5 or 6 in the morning or sometimes 4. But that's what my body is telling me. I take a nap every
Right.
day. Sometimes it's 20 minutes, sometimes it's 2 hours. But your sleep can get compromised with your biochemistry later in life, and that's where I am. So you got to learn to adapt, but you never stop the physicality. If you're in a wheelchair, I would be going around a track or through some
Yes.
flat area. I'd be out cranking away the wheelchair. I'd be doing any activity I could in my wheelchair. And if I was a quadriplegic and I couldn't move that much at all, I'd be figuring out a way to go qigong and move my my mental acuity around and my intentions and mindfulness around to the best of my ability, because you can't give up. If you give up, you're doomed, and then you're doomed to substances and depression.
Yeah. It's I have this been practicing a personal habit for quite a many years. You hear the concept of New Year's resolution. So I threw that out the door a long, long time ago. And what I do every year is I typically choose 2 or 3 words that are going to be repeated like as a mantra. They're going to stay with me that year specifically and very emphasized. And, like determination and, longevity or willpower. So I've just come up, it's funny because I just was watching that Leonardo da Vinci bio on television, and my new mantra, and now I think this is going to be my mantra for basically the rest of my days. And I came up with grateful, focus, and fortitude.
Yeah.
And I am enamored by Da Vinci's dream, imagine, and create. So it's almost like I feel a warmth in my heart and a sense of comfort in knowing that, and as long as you can dream, you can imagine, and with imagination, which is being completely humans, right? The physiology and the psychology of the young children, just going to the gas station, going to a grocery store, and you have all that advertising. Why I left advertising? They don't have no time to imagine anything. And I think that's a great disservice. I think it just goes against all basic humanity's physiology and the ability to be a healthy participant. So with the technology, just the screens are not right, just not doing it. It's causing irreparable harm. I just can't imagine. I can't imagine, like you said, you have to keep moving no matter what, and adjust the world as much as you can to find a complementary kind of through zone flow. And the flow is a really big word for me. Because like I said, it's dynamic. It's always changing. But like you mentioned, with your father at an early age, that self-esteem and confidence that was built, that just, that is so deep ingrained no matter what you experience the rest of your life. And you could just try to imagine. I can't even imagine putting my head around growing up today and basically being treated, and like you said, overeducated, or assuming that this is what you all need to do, and this is what is like, okay, you're on the right track, and there's no independent imagination of like really, what that bliss is, as Campbell says, follow your bliss. So I've always been looked at as almost like my older brother. It's so funny because he's very conservative, very straight-laced, forward thinking, and I'm just the opposite. And he said to me, Sifu, he goes, Greg, I don't know how you do it, because he's always shaking his head like, what are you into now? He goes, I don't know how you do it, but you always seem to land on your feet. And I saw my father get laid off after 50 years. I mean, after a 20-some, 30-year career. And I just told myself when I saw that unknowns that life is hard, but I'm ultimately going to work to have the most control over the journey and how I begin to learn how to react to the challenges every day. And the challenges will be mine, the successes will be mine, and the failures will be mine. And again, if you don't, right, how do you know failure? How do you know success? One or the other. Polarity, you go back to Star Wars, black and white, good and evil,
Great
light,
film.
light and dark, right? It's
Kids
classic.
today still love that movie.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
amazingly enough, when I worked in some high school teaching jobs in the early 2000s, these kids knew who Bruce Lee was. The guy did 3 films. He was on Kato's Green Hornet for a little bit. That show's out of they're not running it anymore. So how do all these people know who Bruce Lee was? I mean, they just gravitated to him. It's almost like this out of universe energy that he had. And so I think all this stuff is wonderful. I unfortunately have to go. I'm going to take my dad to the doctor right now.
Absolutely,
But I'll end it. You asked me about what is the job of the body. The job in the body in the modern era, according to the current stream of consciousness, is to carry around the head, because the head is where people live.
Carry, what do you mean by that? Carry around the head.
Well, we're living in our heads. See, everything's connected to our heads. Our eyes are in there. We're looking down at our iPhone. What is the body's job in the Wall-E world? The body's job is to carry around the head, because the head's going to say, go get the macaroni and cheese, go get the coffee, go get the this, go turn on the iPhone, go get the laptop, go play whatever game on video. So to counteract that, you have to regroup. And I think the 60s and 70s is a good way to regroup. You play games. Games are more fun than video games. Being part of a game where you catch a ball or you throw a ball and somebody else catches it, that's the coolest thing in the world. When you've got 6 people on the defense, 6 people on the offense in these neighborhood games, and you finally get to be the quarterback and you break away from the touch or the tackle and you launch that thing and you watch it 2, 3, and then he catches it and it scores a touchdown. There's nothing on a video game that could compete with that. Nothing. Come on.
Right. The amount of endorphins, and I completely, and what I have to mention to that is my whole program. It's called BASE. It's called Beamwork Active Crossover Education, and it's all about games, creating teams, competitions, physical activity with all functional movements and challenges and collaborations of actually bringing in different forces from different places to try to keep yourself kind of put together and functional, and challenges of movements. So again, we know exercising the brain, that repetitive behavior, that connect to the body's natural physiological state, because you really don't know how you feel unless you move enough. And if you stop moving in general, you don't move well. You can just see that. And it's amazing because people will see me work and they'll ask me in the gym, they're like, number one, usually they say, are you a dancer? And I go, well, not professionally, but I love to dance. And they're like, you move like a dancer. And I don't walk around and train or condition myself like a bodybuilder. I train myself to be able to pick up go play golf or play a volleyball game, go have fun with community, right? That old school, like go ride horses. And it's interesting because movement became a buzzword a little bit in the fitness industry, and then it fell off, and so did balance. So I like to think that I'm keeping that alive, and I'm bringing my work to now in addiction centers and getting these young kids physical, back to communicating, teamwork, understanding that their house, is their body temple. And I think it's just super important. Obviously, your work, I admire your perspective. We're just so much alike in terms of, right, that kind of what we call destiny. So it's been a real pleasure. I know you got to get going. All right, till next time, kids. See you later. Bye.
Professor.